Is gratitude the real game changer in leadership? Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's business strategist. And I'm pumped to share an amazing conversation with my good buddy Chester Elton. Now, me and Chester collaborated on an amazing summit back in 2022. And what I love about Chester is his energy, the fact that he is so humble, and he stands out. He loves the color of orange. So we dive deep into how teams can thrive using gratitude and appreciation and recognition, and how to create thriving cultures. So listen, today is going to be an absolute masterclass. Make sure you got your notebook and pen handy. Let's dive straight in. Enjoy. I'm here today with the amazing Chester Elton. Now, Chester, believe it or not, has worked with a number of different companies such as Procter & Gamble, Pepsi, Amex, Avis, just to mention a few. He's a 3 times New York Times bestselling author and also been voted number 4 leadership and culture coaches in the world. And also, I forgot to mention this, is also a Fulham Football Club fan. Chester, just want to say welcome.
Thank you very much. But pleased to be with you. By the way, my publisher would be disappointed if I didn't say we actually have 5 New York Times bestselling books.
Okay, my bad.
When you're a Fulham fan, you've got to take every win you can get.
Absolutely. We've known each other quite a few number of years, and I know your background. Would it be okay if you could just tell us a little bit more how you got into psychology? What was your fascination into organizational change and culture?
Sure. You know, actually, really interesting story. Well, if you're me, it's interesting. You know, I started in sales. I was actually in broadcasting and then went to go work in sales for a company that actually produced recognition schemes for companies, years of service, sales, and so on. And it was quite interesting. I loved getting into the whole culture of appreciation and gratitude and so on. And it was I remember I was in my car and I had this epiphany, and I called my CEO and said, you know, if we were the thought leaders in our industry around employee appreciation and engagement, my job as a salesperson would be a lot easier. People would call us because we'd be the experts. And you know what, boss? Experts publish. We should publish the definitive book on employee recognition. He goes, you know what? That's a great idea. Write the book. And I said, boss, I'm actually not a writer. I'm a salesperson. So when I said we should write the book, I meant you should write the book and I should benefit. And he was a wonderful leader. His name's Kent Murdoch. We're still great friends. He said, you know what? You're a smart guy. Figure it out. Isn't that wonderful? So he challenged me. And so for about a year, I played with ideas and was thinking about what would the title be and on and on. And he called me back. Again, sign of a great leader, right? He said, I've just hired a writer. His name is Adrian Gostick. Introduce yourself. Write the book. And Adrian and I, for 20 years, have been studying workplace culture, leadership, gratitude. Yeah. We just finished our 12th book, and you know, our books are in 30 languages and so on. So I think it's a great lesson in leadership that you can get more from your people than you think if you just ask and then provide the way forward. You know, he said, I like the idea, always like the idea, and now I've got a writer for you. I'm going to pave the way. And so that's how we ended up doing the research we've been doing for the last 20 years.
And what was that sales job, just out of curiosity? I mean, was that in retail? What industry?
We actually sold recognition programs to companies. So, you know, you'd get 5 years, you'd get a little catalog, you'd get a pin, there'd be a ceremony and so on. So we manufactured the awards, we sold the awards, we distributed the awards, and we taught leaders how to present the awards, right? And then it started getting more into how do you engage your people and so on. So it went from simply being a supplier to actually then being a coach and being a trainer for those leaders. So there was a wonderful evolution while I was there.
That's an interesting transition as such. You know, just listening to that, you know, going from that to that, the dots kind of worked out really nicely for you, didn't they?
You know, I think you work really hard and you try different things and good things happen. I will tell you, it's hilarious because I grew up in Canada, so I go back and I meet old friends from my high school and so on. They'll go, so 5 New York Times bestselling books. I go, yeah. They go, how'd that happen? I said, well, I have a friend who's actually the writer. They go, oh, okay. So it's a partnership. And they go, oh, that part we get. So it is interesting also to, I think, surround yourself with great talent. And my partner in crime, I always say I'm Robin to his Batman, is Adrian Gostick. And he really is a brilliant writer. And as we've worked together over and over again. I mean, when you write 12 books together, you sort of get into a rhythm and a pattern. And it's not only are we great business partners, but obviously he's become one of my dearest.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I know that the world goes through different changes, whether it be 9/11, whether it be the financial crash, whether it be COVID, whatever it might be. But I guess I'll jump straight in right away and try to get more of an understanding about what employees are looking for from leaders in times of change, whether it be change internally or externally. Maybe we could kind of dive in there.
Well, I think your examples are spot on. You know, I live just outside New York City in Summit, New Jersey. And so when you talk about the financial crisis and 9/11 and all those things, I mean, we were right here for all of that, you know.
Right.
And I think in times of crisis, what we have discovered in our research, and by the way, we have a database of over 1 million engagement surveys, another 75,000 of our motivators assessment and so on. Two things, several things. I would focus on two things in particular that employees really need from their leaders in a crisis. One is that communication has got to skyrocket. You've got to continually communicate. You know, we're dealing with some of our clients in real time. When you don't communicate, when there's a void in communication, employees will fill that void with fear. I mean, it's just a natural reaction. We're not saying to ourselves, hey, what's going to go right today? You know, our defense mechanisms go into hyperdrive and say, what could possibly go wrong? So it's really interesting. One of the executives I coach is a wonderful guy, Jake Reynolds, and he says, you know, if you think you're over communicating, you're probably about right. You know, if you think you're doing it too much, you're probably about right. You know, particularly at the beginning of a crisis, it's literally daily calls, and sometimes more than daily calls.
Wow.
How are you doing now? How can I help? And in that communication, there has to be a roadmap to hope. You know, and I think what happened with 9/11 is it was an event. It happened, it was over, now we're recovering. Hurricane Katrina, you know, it's an event and it happens. The thing with the financial crisis is you're not sure when it's going to end, right? The stock market's up, it's down, you know, the companies are failing, companies are thriving. And so there's this tough part about when does it end? And again, this is where leaders have to step up with communication. And you've got to say, look, we're taking this a day at a time. You might recall the book Good to Great. You know, they talked about the prisons in Vietnam. And they said, who are the people that didn't survive in the prisons? And he said, oh, it was the optimists. The guys that would say, it'll be over by Christmas, it'll be over by Valentine's Day, or whatever it might be. And when those deadlines came and went, the depression set in. So again, our long communication is, here's our roadmap. Here's what we need to do to get through this. We're going to track it very carefully. We're going to hold ourselves accountable, and we're going to push through. So that's number one. Communication needs to go up. Secondly, and we found this fascinating, gratitude has to double, triple, quadruple. And what I mean by that is you have to celebrate small wins along the way. You know, you say, look, here's our roadmap. We're going to celebrate at the end. Well, no. You know this as a gunner, right? As a fan. When do you start to cheer on match day? When does that happen?
It depends. I mean, it depends on when we win. I mean, that's not very often.
well, here's my point: is if you're a football fan, you're celebrating on the way to the match.
Of course.
And you're celebrating, you know, when the match starts. You're celebrating a good defensive play, a good pass, a good possession, and certainly the goals. Right. You celebrate the entire match. And so this idea of I'm going to withhold my gratitude until the end, until we finally achieve, is a mistake that a lot of leaders make, by the way. It's sort of, great, we've checked this off, what's next? Instead of, great, let's celebrate that, even if it's for a moment, to build that momentum to get us to the end. So communication needs to go up exponentially, and gratitude needs to go up exponentially.
Love it.
Find small ways to engage with your people and create that positivity.
It's interesting that we're talking about gratitude, because that kind of moves smoothly into the next question. Why is it so important to use things like gratitude and recognition and appreciation, especially when we're trying to drive high performance into a business or an organization? I'd love to find out more about that.
Well, here's what's really interesting when you talk about that, Adam. Yeah. So we took a look at a database from Willis Towers Watson, a global study they did around employee engagement. They had 8 million engagement surveys. Wow. We culled it down to the organizations that were 3 to 5 times more productive than their peers. It boiled it down to a database of 300,000 engagement surveys. And we built a model. We called it the all-in culture. We published it in our book, All In. Great.
Well, it's a coincidence.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time marketing, coming up with that title. Anyway, the point is at the core of the model is engage, enable, and energize. So the engagement piece is I'll give discretionary efforts. The enable piece is I've created the wherewithal for you to get the job done. Back to my personal story. It says, I like the idea. We've hired an author. We've hired a writer. Collaborate, and your odds of writing the book go way up, right? So this idea of I'm going to give you the tools to get your job, where during the virus, right, people are sheltering in place. Have I got a good internet connection? Have I got all the access I need to the information so that I can effectively work from home, right? Thirdly is this idea of energy, energize your people, the why of work. And that why of work, once you have a why, you can figure out the how and you can overcome a lot of obstacles. Well, that why is the emotional connection to work. And the emotional connection to work is I believe what I do matters and I make a difference. And lastly, and when I make a difference, someone noticed it and celebrated it. So this idea of I'm reinforcing the right behaviors intellectually and emotionally. And nothing does that better than simple thank yous and expressions of gratitude along the way. We never studied a high performance team that did not have a culture of gratitude. It was fascinating that leaders led deeply with gratitude in the workplace and took it home, which we'll get into later. And lastly, it wasn't just top down. We think of the responsibility of celebration and so on. It's the manager, it's the supervisor, it's the VP, it's the CEO.
Right.
Yes, that's where it starts because their behavior gives everyone else permission to do the same. And that's a very important dynamic. After that, if it doesn't become peer-to-peer, if it doesn't start to cross-pollinate, you'll never have the culture you want. You need to encourage peer-to-peer recognition because leaders are not going to see everything. And so as you start to have your meetings, does anyone have anything they want to shout out? What have we been doing really well this week? Who would like to recognize someone maybe not on the team, maybe in another part of the organization? And so on and so on. Once it becomes peer-to-peer, that's where the energy goes up. That's where innovation goes up. That's where we feel psychologically safe to innovate and to be creative. In every culture we studied, that was a key element. It was never missing. Isn't that interesting?
I'd actually read a little bit about that in your bio, and I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Human psychology, I guess, going back to that.
Sure.
And one of my, I'm going to call powerhouses in terms of my fascination, especially with organizational culture and learning, was around the research studies around what Carol Dweck did back in the 70s and in the 90s. I found that quite interesting and eye-opening as well. You'll be familiar with Carol's work anyway, with what you do and things like that. Have you found that there are similarities between what you do and what she does?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities with a lot of work out there. And what I love is the way it coalesces around the basic human needs. You can go right back to Maslow's pyramid, self-actualization.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you what's fascinating, Adam, is that so many leaders still don't embrace this. And that's what I think is, I guess I should be grateful. It keeps me working. The other side is that they have these myths. And, in our latest book, Leading with Gratitude, we looked at some very specific myths to dispel them. And of course, one of those myths is that fear is the best motivator. We're just going to put the fear of God in people, particularly in a crisis. We go, wow, we got to rally everybody. Your jobs are on the line, and now I'm going to put the fear of God in people. So we thought, well, let's take a deep dive on that. Let's find out, what is the reaction of the employees? So a wonderful study was done that said, look, if you fear that your job is on the line, are you willing to work harder? 37% of people said yes. So, well, that's great. I'm going to put the fear of God in a third of my people. We said, what about the demanding boss? The one that's always, micromanaging and so on, very demanding. Are you going to work harder? 38% said yes. So it bumped the percentage point.
Wow.
Then the question was asked, if your leader expressed often expressions of gratitude and appreciation for your work, how much more likely are you to work harder? 83% said yes.
Whoa.
So, as a leader, say, okay, so choose your number. Do you want 37, 38, or do you want 83? And I think it's fascinating that we still, default to fear and micromanaging. It seems so easy to do, Well, I don't know if I can guarantee your job if we don't hit the quota there. So you might want to work a little harder. And I'll tell you what was fascinating as we looked at leaders, and we do a lot of executive coaching now. most leaders that led by fear didn't realize they were leading with fear. Isn't that fascinating? They said, I'm just being very honest, open, and candid. Isn't that a good thing? I'm sharing everything. I'm sharing the fear. I'm sharing the gloom. I'm sharing the doom. I'm sharing it. And it was fascinating. He said, you're scaring the crap out of your people. Well, then that's a good thing, right? I go, no, actually, that's not a good thing. Let's work on this.
It's interesting. I want to talk about tools, because practical tools about how to, I suppose, inspire performance, because there is lots of great tools, but I guess being a 5 times New York Times bestselling author, let's just say that 5 times, get the number right? What tools can you recommend for a lot of people, for a lot of our listeners, whether it be small businesses, whether it be larger organizations? Love to find out.
Yeah, excellent. We love our work in that it's very research and data based. And then, of course, the case studies of the stories people remember. If you don't have the tools, if we don't give you the wherewithal on how to replicate that, then it's just an interesting story. It's a cat video on YouTube. So what we set up is 2 words very important, I think, for leaders to create this culture of gratitude, high performance culture, is to be very intentional and be very disciplined. And in being intentional, I like to set up with executives triggers, little simple reminders on how to engage your people. For example, there's a leader, Avis Budget Rental Car in Dallas, Texas, manages about 400 people, I think. His trigger is 10 coins in his left pocket. So what he does, he puts 10 coins in his left pocket. He says, look, I set a goal every day to have 10 positive interactions with my people every day. And the way I keep track is I move a coin from my left pocket to my right pocket. So that's his trigger.
I love it.
And he says, look, if I get to noon and I've got 8 coins in my left pocket, I'm not doing my job. So now the point is when you manage 400 people, are you going to be able to get to 400 people every day? Obviously not, right? So, and you can't be with your people every day. So he sets up all these ways which he can engage. He can include a group email. He can text people. They've got a Slack channel and so on, right? When he is at a facility and calls people together, he starts off with, hey, tell me 3 things you did really well this week. Let's start with a positive. And then at the end, he says, hey, is there anybody in the group that wants to call out somebody who's done a particularly good job this week? Mm-hmm. You see, and he's creating that culture of, hey, there's a lot of little things that are going right every day, and we need to celebrate those. Now, what do you think happens, Adam, when he's got to have tough conversations with his people? Do you think his people are open to his coaching and his ideas?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Because he's built this relationship up with people, hasn't he? He's built this trust, and people have their barriers a lot lowered and that kind of stuff, I guess.
Exactly. Well, see, when he shows up to a facility or an airport or kiosk, whatever it is, what do you think the reaction is to him showing up? It's very positive, because he's here to celebrate all the things that are doing well. And then when things go wrong, right, he can pull them aside and say, hey, listen, the way you interacted with that customer really wasn't appropriate. Let me walk you through it again. He shows up not to punish. He shows up to coach and to encourage. So that's one really good trigger. I love that 10 coins. The other trigger is we talk about seeing and expressing. And we took a really deep dive in our research and leading with gratitude on this one. Seeing what's going on. And we won't go into all of them. It was 4 and 4. In the book, we said, here are the 8 best practices for extraordinary business results. One in particular that I think is a really good tool for leaders is what we call assume positive intent. And it's in the seeing category. And what I mean by this is, so often as leaders, when something goes wrong, we go, oh, Adam, you understand how this is going to ruin my day? What you have done has affected me. Enough about you. This is all about me, right? And we somehow get it in our heads that there are certain people that come to work with the goal of screwing up, it couldn't be further from the truth. I am sure there is someone out there who actually did wake up this morning and say, my goal is before noon today, I'm going to screw up 3 times. It is so rare, right? I love Hubert Joly, who is a leader we studied. Best Buy is a big retailer here in the States, and he took them from $1 billion deficit to a $1 billion surplus.
Wow.
And I said, how did you do that? And he said, look, it's all about your people. He says, I assume that people come to work wanting to do a good job. And in trying to do a good job, they make mistakes, and that's okay. We can fix the mistakes. So assume that people are coming to work. Now, Amy Edmondson is this Harvard business professor who wrote a wonderful book called The Fearless Organization. And I don't mean like fearless, like we just charge into the void and do whatever. Fearless meaning that it's safe. I have no fear. If I make a mistake, I can admit that mistake. and we can solve the problem and move on. You see, when you assume positive intent, you create that psychological safety. If you have a culture of fear, if I make a mistake, I'm hiding it. I'm not telling anybody. I'm hoping nobody notices, right? I really hope that nobody notices that the stockroom is actually on fire, right? Instead of calling for help, let's put out the flames. It's kind of like, I'm just going to walk over here and let someone else tell the boss what all that smoke is about, you know? And of course, you go to the dramatic to make a point. You can see that, you know, that tool of assuming positive intent, using that as a trigger, that we have a problem, you are not the problem, and solving those problems is a wonderful tool for leaders to move forward, right? And another tool, just quickly, is know your team. Like, know your players, know how to interact with them. There are those that need an inordinate amount of communication. There are others that really, you only need to tell them once, right? And then if you know what their key motivators are, you know, whether it's recognition or maybe it's social responsibility or it's variety in their work or it's their families, whatever it might be, when it comes time to reward those good behaviors, you can do it in a way that's meaningful. And let me give you a specific example.
Sure.
So I was working in Detroit, newly married. My wife and I were starting our careers and loved Detroit and the automotive industry and all that comes with it, right? Well, always wanted to work in New York City, and so did my wife. We love New York, and in the organization I was working with, big offices in New York. So there was an opening on a sales team there. I said, let's go for it, you know. The NBC Blue team. It was weird, right? Steve Schwartz. So I go and I interview with Steve, and it goes really well, and we get the job. So I go back to Detroit, and I tell my wife, this is going to be so much fun. It's going to be great. And she's so excited. Well, the next day, you know, Steve Schwartz, my new manager, lovely guy, package shows up at the door, a little congratulations, celebrate with your wife. Open it up, and it's this just massive bottle of champagne. Do you think, how cool is that?
Wow, that's cool.
Well, in my religious beliefs, in my faith, we do not drink alcohol. It was, listen, lovely thought, lovely man, right? And the thought, if you say it's the thought that counts, then it counted. Execution, not so much.
No.
Now, did the bottle go to waste? No. Our neighbors thought my new boss was just the best guy. And they were hoping that before we left, he would send more, you know, for their celebration. So a simple story to illustrate, look, know your folks, know how to reward them. Do they want time off with their family? Do they want an assignment in R&D? Do they want to develop a new product? And so on and so on. So, you know, those tools I think are very important. I love the 10 coins. I love the assume positive intent. And then there's know your team. We also say with gratitude, look, do it now, do it often, be specific, be sincere. Because like the communication piece, leaders will say, you know, I would recognize more. I would be more grateful. I just think you can overdo it. I think if you do it too much, it becomes trite. And I love it when they say that.
That's interesting.
Because they say, really, when do you think was the last time anybody on your team went home at the end of the day and said to their spouse or their partner, whoever it is, and said, you know what? Couldn't get anything done today. So really said, yeah, oh, it was celebration after celebration. I mean, it was thank you cards. It was cakes. It was balloons. Seriously, I got to start working from home if I'm going to get anything done. It never happens. Like, seriously, it never happens. Again, if you think you're overdoing it, it's probably about right.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably about.
You know what's really fascinating, though, because you've highlighted about lots of different research studies around the whole kind of benefit of using gratitude and appreciation and recognition, right? But then let's go to the people that don't practice those things, right? And why they don't do it, because I'd like to know more about that, because, and I'm sure that you've had those conversations, those uncomfortable conversations with those types of people. And you're like, I don't get it. Well, what is the matter with these people? I just don't get it.
Well, you know, I'll tell you a cute story. We're doing a real-time study with a restaurant chain here in the U.S. Called Texas Roadhouse, and their founder is a guy named Kent Taylor. There's a lot of Kents in my life. Kent Taylor, and he's a remarkable guy, very down home, very, you know, blue collar, understands his business from the dishwasher right through to, you know, the customers and community he serves. So one of the things as we were interviewing Kent for our book, I said, well, you know, everybody I think understands what gratitude means. What do you think the opposite of gratitude is. And so just for fun, what words pop into your head? And you can't say ingratitude.
I think the word that comes to my mind is patronizing.
That's a good one. That's actually a new one. We heard, self-centered, egotistical, indifferent was one that came up. Entitlement was one that I thought was interesting. If I'm entitled to it, why would I ever, express gratitude? So I'm talking to Kent Taylor, and he says, opposite of gratitude, geez, just, I don't know. Being an asshole. Which was very Kent. And I thought, so leaders that don't do it, I think there's an interesting psychology there. I think first and foremost, they probably never got it. Do you know what I mean? They probably grew up with a leader that was very, very stingy. We call them gratitude Grinches. I never got it. You're not going to get it either. In New York. Yeah. You want some gratitude? I got your gratitude right here, And so if they never got it, they're less likely to give it. I think with leaders that way, and by the way, 99 times out of 100, good people with poor practices, right? Yeah. And so the thing that we really work on with them is say, well, look, just give it a try. Do it now, do it often, and don't be afraid. They go, well, I'm not going to be very good at this. I said, well, I guarantee you're not going to be very good at it. When was the last time you tried something for the first time and you were, world class right out of the box? The more you do it, the better you'll get. And let your team know. Say, listen, we need to be more encouraging. And I'll tell you, in a crisis in particular, people just need encouragement. Simple little things. Give them your time. I love the idea of the two questions that great leaders ask. How are you doing now? And in a crisis, it's not how are you doing, it's how are you doing now? Because, in the virus, I was like everybody else. I went from ridiculously optimistic to absolutely terrified in a matter of 30 seconds. I was doing great and my phone pinged me. I was like, we're all going to die.
Was that before you started watching CNBC?
Yeah, the news, and studies have been done, 90% of the news you get on your phone is negative because it's negative itself, right? So if you want a pick-me-up, if you want to be encouraged, if you want to, put a little pep in your step, do not look at the news. It's not going to help you. So this idea that you've really got to encourage leaders. Now, here's a fascinating study done by the Harvard School of Business. Said, what is the ratio of positive to negative that creates a positive workplace? What would you guess? What would you, is it 5 to 1, 3 to 1, 1 to 1, 10 to 1? What would be your guess?
Yeah, let's go 7 to 1.
7 to 1 is very close. It's actually 5.9. It's Harvard, so they go to the decimal. You could round it up to 6 and so on. And it's really interesting. One of the challenges I give these leaders is say, what is your ratio? And I'll ask them. One group of pharmaceutical executives, there's a workshop we were doing in Singapore, said, what do you think the ratio should be? And one leader said, well, I think it should be 1 to 1. I said, great, well, defend your answer, right? I said, well, that's balance. For every compliment, there's a criticism, and you've got balance. I said, great.
Sure.
Are you married? The guy said, yeah. I said, well, you should try that in your marriage and see how that goes over. Like your wife comes down the stairs and she's all dressed up for a nice evening out, right? Dinner and a show, right? And she says, how do I look? And you say, because 1 to 1 is balance, you say, oh my gosh, that color of that dress makes your eyes just sparkle. Just sparkle. Of course, the stripes make you look fat. So, that is 1 to 1. Now, your odds of actually going on that dinner and show outing have now gone to 0, right? Because negativity is so much more powerful. And you'll see this, on Amazon, you get a 1-star review. You need 20 to negate that. 20, not 1, not 5, 20. So I ask you, look, in your personal life, you get it. That you can't have a 1 to 1 ratio and have a meaningful relationship. It's the same in the workplace. What is your ratio? Be very careful about that. And that's where I love the 10 pennies or the 10 coins.
Sure.
Because that's your trigger to say, look, I've got to keep that positivity rolling. And by the way, is it a nice thing to do? Absolutely. Will it make your mama proud? You bet. Here's from the Harvard School of Business. In positive, actually, this was Willis Towers Watson. In positive cultures where that ratio is at least 5 to 1, the productivity is 3 times higher than disengaged and twice as high as engaged organizations. So yes, it's a nice thing to do. Yes, it makes people feel good about themselves. And by the way, you're going to double productivity, given that you've got a product that people want. There Definitely. Are some other bedrock.
100%. So I know that some of our listeners, well, quite a few of our listeners are going to be kind of smaller businesses, entrepreneurs. What can those types of businesses take from, say, some of the larger corporates, which are kind of some of the clients that you work with? What can they take away in terms of building their own culture from the ground upwards?
I think the rule of three is really important. And the great organizations, and it goes in this order. First and foremost, it's about your people. You have to take care of your people first. Secondly, you take care of your customers. Third, you take care of your community.
Yeah.
So the idea that I take care of my people first, particularly in a crisis, do they have the tools they need to deliver on the job? Do we understand the roadmap to success? And then absolutely, how do we take care of our customers? Our products and services are necessary for them. How do we make sure our supply chain is taken care of? How do we make sure our products are safe? How do we make sure we get them delivered in a timely way? And then thirdly, how are we giving back to the community? And I'll give you a very specific example of why this is so critically important. Texas Roadhouse restaurants, by the way, there are 600 restaurants. They have no national advertising campaign, none.
Wow.
They take their store managers, they call their restaurant stores, and they say, your job is to become mayor of your town. Whatever your town needs, you're there. So now, in the COVID-19, they're feeding policemen and firemen. They're feeding nurses and doctors, all out of their restaurant. They're making sure, first and foremost, that their people are safe, their stores are clean, right? They've got the goggles, the masks, the gloves. Secondly, they're saying, how can we better serve our customers? Well, their takeaway business was 5% of their business. And then they had to shut down all their restaurants. Now it's 100%. Because they had taken such good care of their people, and their people had that emotional engagement to work, they were ready to do whatever they needed to do to keep their restaurants going. Now, they took no government funding, right? They didn't lay off one person. Wow. They have 70,000 employees, 70,000 in restaurants, where most restaurants immediately let at least half their people go.
Absolutely.
Right? And they all got together and said, how do we do this? How do we do this? Well, let's start doing this. Let's start doing that. In 4 weeks, they went from obviously losing money to a profit.
What?
In 4 weeks. 4 weeks. How does that? It happens because for 20 years, they've been building up this culture where their people come first. It's Texas Roadhouse. They're roadies. How do we take care of the roadies? How do we make sure they've got right medical care? How do we make sure they're safe when they come to work? How do we keep them engaged? In fact, in April, they actually paid bonuses. Not only were they continuing to pay their people, they paid bonuses for the people that showed up. Now, the people that did not feel safe coming to work, that stayed home, they paid them too. They paid them too. Ridiculous. Secondly, is their customers. They said, look, we've got to redo our menu. We're going to put together family packs. We're going to put together just incredible value because we know people have less money. We're going to give them even more value. And then they said, look, how do we keep people working? They said, look, he went to the grocery store. This is Kent Taylor. He noticed that they were running out of meat. He said, well, we get tons of meat. So instead of just selling cooked meals for takeaway, he said, you know what? Curb to grill. We've got these beautiful hand-cut sirloin steaks, T-bone steaks. We're going to sell them below market value because our communities need the food and we want them to have good food. You know what else that does? That keeps all his meat cutters working. Right?
That's true.
So he said, how do we keep our meat cutters working? Well, let's sell raw meat. So all this innovation is happening because first and foremost, he took care of his people. Secondly, he took care of his customers. You know, people saw what they were doing and they would line up, cars would line up to buy their food from Texas Roadhouse because they knew they were good citizens. They were taking care of their people. They were taking care of their communities. Those three things: people, customer, community.
Love it. Fantastic. Great stuff. It's interesting because, I mean, we both do a little bit of coaching and consulting anyway. One thing that I've noticed, and you may have noticed this too, if you are working with, say, a founder or a business owner that maybe have started up their business from the ground upwards, like from startup, right? And they begin to build, they get to 6-7 figures or whatever it is. When does a leader know, or when should a leader know when to pass the reins on to somebody else? Because do you know what I see? I see organizations, they get to a point where they get stuck. And you've probably seen this, right? They get stuck, and it's normally because of the person that's you know, do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Fascinating. I was really interested in that, and because I see so many businesses get stuck, even if it's in times of change and adversity and whatever it is. But love to find out what your thoughts are on that.
It's such a tough question,
Yeah.
because, founders are so emotionally engaged. I mean, it's their identity. This is their creation, right? And it's not just what they do, it's who they are. It's such an important part of just who they believe they are and their self-worth. With leaders like that, clearly one of the signs to look for is passion. Once the passion starts to wane, that's a good indicator. Secondly, as I think they need to start thinking of legacy. What will your legacy be? Like, literally, do you want the company to fail when you leave? Because that will prove that it was you and all you. That, I think, in particular, when you go through a crisis, is how do you want to be remembered? Great leaders are forged in crisis. I will tell you that Ken Taylor, remarkable leader in the restaurant industry, well known, and has a phenomenal loyalty of his people because he cares so much about them. Now, what's going to happen is, in the next 5 to 7 years, he's going to need to take a major step back. Who is the next Ken Taylor? And what will the legacy be? Southwest Airlines is a wonderful airline here in the States.
Absolutely.
And their founder stepped away, and the organization did not skip a beat. That's the legacy of true greatness. And so I think you've got to get it into founders' minds that they want the legacy play. They want the 100-year organization. They want to be known for not just the founder and the one that could really do all of these wonderful things, that they were able to pass on that passion, that innovation, that insight, and create many others. For years, it was, if you wanted to be an extraordinary leader, you went to GE. And you could look around the corporate universe, and that guy was at GE, and that guy was at GE, and that guy was at GE. That's, I think, part of the legacy that founders really, if they embrace, it makes it easier to say, I'm going to create the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. I'll tell you a cute story. I was doing a conference in Bologna, Italy, met this phenomenal family, the Suguso family. And after the conference, my wife came with me. Like, it's so funny. I say, honey, there's a conference in Toledo, Ohio. Do you want to come? No, not interested. I'm going to Italy. Oh, I'm all in.
I bet.
So after the conference, the organizer let it be known that we were going to go to Verona, and we were going to go to, Florence, and we were going to Venice. Well, the Seguso family comes up and says, by the way, we live in Venice. We would like to host you. And of course, always fun to hang out with the natives. I said, well, tell me a little bit about your business. Small family-owned business. I said, well, we blow glass. We make glass. Venice, right? Venetian glass, Murano glass.
Yeah.
I said, oh, that's fascinating. How long has this business been in your family? I said, 20 generations.
What?
I went, yeah, that's what I said. I went, what? He goes, yeah. 1397.
Wow.
And I thought, you've got to be kidding. That was before America was discovered. This is, how do you do that? He said, it's all about legacy.
Yeah.
It's about craftsmanship. It's about beauty. And it's about passing the baton. And it was really interesting. As I was talking to, the patriarch, Signor Seguso, I said, oh, passing the baton so you can win the race. He said, oh, no, the race is never over. We pass the baton to continue the race. And they've already got the next 2 generations lined up.
That's amazing.
So the legacy of, the patriarch now isn't about him. It's about what he can leave behind for his family. And I love that. I mean, seriously, 23 generations.
That blows me away. That's fantastic. Interesting. You were talking at the beginning, right, of the conversation, which is all around the 3 E's, which was fascinating. But how can you take those same principles, especially because all of our listeners are, some of them are big sort of 7, 8 figure, 9 figure companies, and then some of them are very smaller micro companies or whatever it is. But how can you take those 3 E's and apply those principles in order to increase the results in your company?
Yeah, big or small. I mean, the principle is the principle, and it literally is universal. And the first and foremost is, particularly if you're a small company, make sure you hire properly. Hire to your culture and your fit. If you're an extrovert organization that's very, customer facing, introverts are probably not the best fit, depending on what their responsibilities are. So hire to fit. It really is about engaging people around your noble cause, not just the what and the how. It's the why. Why do we do what we do? That is ever going to be important, big, small, or in between. The enablement is really all about making sure that we're free to innovate, that we're free to make sure that we have the tools to do the job. And that energy, that energy comes from upping your gratitude and making sure that everybody's voice is heard, that there's no fear. Here's what I love about organizations that really embrace the E plus E plus E. And that is, when you are happy and engaged and motivated at work, you're literally 150% more likely to be happy and engaged and motivated in your personal life. Because we spend so much time at work, this is a wonderful study done by the University of California. We spend so much time at work, that will ripple through. And I think as business leaders, we have an obligation to send our people home happy. We just do, right? Now, the unfortunate thing that we discovered is that sometimes we leave our best selves at work. We're so focused on work that when we come home, we're exhausted, and we don't give our best selves to those people that should be the most important people in our lives. So creating, people say, well, that's work-life balance. I don't think that if you're really extraordinary at anything, you have any kind of balance. If you're a world-class athlete, your life is not in balance. It is out of balance. What you're looking for is work-life harmony. And that's what I think you really strive for, is you're happy and engaged and motivated at work, and you bring that harmony home so that you are present. At the end of our book, Leading with Gratitude, we created what we call the Baker's Dozen. 13 things that the leaders that we studied actually did at home. And I'd love to share a couple of them with you, because
that'd be great.
So, Dave Kirpin, good friend of ours in New York City, he said, look, I'd come home after work. This was, pre-virus. He said, we try to eat dinner as a family as often as we could, and the kids would come to the table and we'd say, how was school? And they'd say, fine. Great. What did you learn? Nothing.
Always.
This is a conversation that every parent has had with their children.
Absolutely.
So we thought we'd change that up and say, okay, you need to answer 3 questions at every meal. First is, tell me about the best part of your day. Brag about the best part of your day. Secondly, who are you grateful for that's not at the table? Somebody you're grateful for during the day, somebody that did something kind for you or helped you out. And then thirdly, who are you grateful for who is at the table, who has not been thanked yet? And he said, it changed everything in our conversation. And he says, at first the kids were like, oh, Dad, you're always doing stuff like that. Finally, he says, I knew they'd really bought in when they brought a friend to dinner. And they'd say, okay, look, you got to answer 3 questions, okay? Don't embarrass me. Have good answers. That was a bad part of your day. So those simple kinds of things. The other thing is, like at work, if you're assuming positive intent, you give your employees a break. Say, look, I know you were trying to do the right thing. It just, it went wrong. Absolutely. You got to do the same thing with your kids. If they're kids, cut them some slack. Yeah. We had a thing in our neighborhood, our next door neighbor, we'd known him forever, his teenage sons, they were playing basketball and they were getting kind of loud. And one of the neighbors called the police, and I went, call the police? What are you, they're teenagers. Now, when you were a teenager, you probably never, ever did anything stupid. Right. I did. And I was really appreciative of the neighbors and my parents that said, he's a teenager, he's a knucklehead, cut him some slack. So simple principles that, we know work really well in the workplace, please take them home. Be happy to see your family when you get home. Cut them some slack and have engaging conversations and be appreciative for the fact that they show up and they still love you.
Fantastic. Because we've gone through so much information, do you have any sort of final thoughts around today and, what some of our listeners could do around what we've been talking about?
Sure. Well, we've created great resources for you. Obviously our new book, Leading with Gratitude, is available everywhere. And I'd also recommend our book on culture, All In. We have a wonderful training company. It's thecultureworks.com.
CultureWorks.
There's a lot of free downloads and whatnot there. And we also have created Leading with Gratitude book.com. You can download the first chapter of the book for free, the foreword, and there are lots of podcasts, and our podcast will go in there, I'm sure, as well as some fun videos and so on, all free of charge. Our mission really is to encourage people to create these great places to work. Having said all that, I think, coming back to sum up what we're talking about is, in times of crisis, you need to double, quadruple your incidence of communication. Just, you cannot over communicate. And the same is with gratitude. Now, once those good practices are in place in a crisis, please don't abandon them. It's still good practice, pre, during, and post crisis. And I'm a big fan of the rule of three. I said, look, I hope that three things will happen for you as the leader as you manage through any kind of crisis. And one is that you'll be more grateful. Be grateful for the people that show up, that do work hard, that are helping you solve these problems and keep your business afloat. So the gratitude goes up. That we will be more kind and more considerate of our employees, of our customers, of our communities, that assume positive intent. And then a lesson from my father that I love to pass on. My dad was just the happiest guy ever. He assumed that every time anybody said anything to him, he took it as a compliment. It's just a wonderful way to live, right? Is this. He used to say to me, Ches, be good to everybody, because everybody's having a tough day. You don't know what people have just come from.
Right.
They've had some bad news, trouble with a kid or whatever, right? It used to be that you'd say, look, as you meet people on the street or at work, 8 out of 10 people, there's something going on. Well, now it's 10 out of 10. Everybody's got something going on. So be grateful, be more kind, and just understand that, everybody's having a tough day. Be good to everybody. It's a great way to lead. We've got the database and the case studies to prove it. It's also just a better way to live. People that live a grateful life, their blood pressure is better, their relationships are deeper, and those are the kind of people you want to be around. Gratitude attracts gratitude. It just does. And it's gratitude that makes us joyful. It's not joy that makes us grateful. It's gratitude that makes us joyful. My title that I was given by the Toronto Globe and Mail is the Apostle of Appreciation.
I saw that, actually. I was like, where did that come from? That's very faith type of, do you know what I mean? I'm like, apostle. I'm like, wow.
That's right. Well, and that's my sermon I just gave you, right? Be grateful, be kind, be good to everybody. And it's my story and I'm sticking to it. I was fortunate to grow up in a ridiculously happy household with a father that just exuded gratitude in everything he did. And I've been lucky to work for leaders that were very much that way too. And that's really my wish for the listeners. Find the culture that fits for you. And hopefully it will be a culture where you believe what you do matters, that you made a difference. And when you made a difference, it was noticed and celebrated, because that's a great place to work and that creates a great place to live.
Love it. And that just is the perfect kind of roundup of our interview, which is amazing. So guys, listen, you may have or may not have any questions. Feel free to connect with Chester on social media. LinkedIn is a very popular platform for you, I believe.
Yes.
And what I was going to say is you probably get lots and lots of requests like I do. Drop a personal message to Chester. Chester would be more than happy to respond.
LinkedIn is such a great platform. It's how you and I met.
Absolutely.
We're starting to do wonderful LinkedIn live shows on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock New York time. And just fascinating guests that come in and tell their stories. And it's 30 minutes. And we always say it's going to be 30 minutes of great information, inspiration, and your personal roadmap to create a culture of gratitude at work and at home. So I hope you'll join us there too.
Definitely. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed our conversations, me and Chester. I certainly have. So Chester, I just want to say thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It was great fun. I love your energy. I love your haircut. Feel free to call me anytime. It was great fun.
Absolutely. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed today and we'll see you soon. Take care of yourself and have a good one.